The Man from Central Park. Antonio Clark was a successful man. A respected lawyer from a firm in New York City, he lived a comfortable life with his wife Catherine and their two children, Samantha and David. He had built a solid career, known for his integrity and skill in the courtroom. Despite his professional success, Antonio felt a spiritual void, a restlessness that he could not ignore. Raised in a Christian home, Antonio drifted away from the faith over the years. The demands of adulthood and career led him to forget his roots. Praying and attending church was never part of his routine again. Still, there was an underlying desire for something greater, something he couldn't name. Everything began to change when Antonio became involved in a complex case of corporate corruption. Representing a large conglomerate, he found himself in the middle of a storm of accusations and investigations. The case gained great repercussion in the local media, and the pressure on Antonio increased exponentially. His integrity was questioned, and he began to face ethical dilemmas that consumed him. The situation worsened when one of his main clients was arrested for fraud and conspiracy. Antonio was indirectly implicated, accused of covering up his client's illicit actions. His career, built with so much effort, was on the verge of collapse. His reputation in law was at stake, and Antonio found himself struggling to keep everything going. The professional crisis quickly infiltrated Antonio's personal life. Catherine, worried about her family's safety and well-being, tried to support her husband, but the tension was palpable. Samantha and David, while still young, noticed the change in their parents' behavior and became increasingly anxious and worried. Antonio began to lose nights of sleep, consumed by thoughts of failure and despair. He felt helpless and directionless. The situation came to a head when he received a subpoena to appear in court as a witness against his own client. It was a devastating blow. He knew this could mean the end of his career and possibly even a prison sentence. It was on one of these sleepless nights that Antonio remembered the lessons of his childhood, his mother's prayers, and the biblical stories he had heard. In an act of desperation, he knelt by the bed and prayed, asking for guidance and strength to face what was to come. The next day, Antonio decided to walk through Central Park to clear his mind. As he walked, he came across an elderly man sitting on a bench, reading a book. The man raised his eyes and smiled at Antonio, who, moved by an inexplicable force, sat down next to him. The man introduced himself as Elijah and began talking to Antonio about life and its challenges. Elijah seemed to possess deep wisdom and an infectious calm. He spoke about the importance of trusting God and learning to see the good side of every big problem, even when in our hearts there is a feeling of pure anguish and fear. Antony, although skeptical and too eager to reflect, felt comforted by Elijah's words. Before saying goodbye, Elijah handed Antonio a small Bible, telling him to read it whenever he felt he should. Antonio thanked him and returned home, still very worried. He soon forgot about that strange encounter. One morning, Antonio, who had previously been sleeping, was awakened by the memory of his conversation with that man sitting on the park bench. He gets up, goes to the balcony of his apartment, and opens the small Bible. Sometimes Antony wondered what he was doing, and sometimes he found some comfort and inspiration in the sacred words. For some reason, that night, he was alone at that moment. His wife hadn't noticed her husband's absence in bed until dawn. With Elijah's spiritual guidance, Antonio, who no longer knew what to do, began trying to give a new meaning to his life. He made difficult decisions, including resigning from the case that had caused so much turmoil. Despite the professional consequences, he felt a weight being lifted from his shoulders. He was determined to follow a path of integrity and was willing to give up some comforts in exchange for peace. The situation in court became complicated, but Antonio faced the challenges with a new perspective. He knew that he was doing what was right and that regardless of the outcome, his faith would sustain him. The day of final judgment has arrived. Antonio was nervous, but he felt an inner peace that he had never experienced before. He held the small Bible Elijah had given him and prayed silently as he waited his turn to testify. Despite being a very experienced lawyer, Antonio was never in that position. When Antonio took the witness stand, the courtroom was silent. He began to answer questions honestly and clearly, trusting in justice and truth. During his testimony, something extraordinary happened. A man Antonio had never seen before entered the courtroom and asked to speak to the judge. He introduced himself as a forensic auditor who had discovered new evidence that could change the course of the trial. The defense and prosecution were surprised, but the judge allowed the man to present his findings. The new evidence proved Antonio's innocence and revealed a deeper conspiracy that involved several other individuals. The court was thrown into an uproar, but after a detailed analysis, Antony was acquitted of all charges. The case against him was closed, and he was exonerated. Antonio knew this was more than a coincidence. He firmly believed that God had intervened in his life, bringing out the truth and restoring his dignity. He thanked God silently, feeling deep gratitude and reverence. After the trial, Antonio decided to dedicate his life to helping others. He moved away from corporate law and began working as a public defender, helping those who could not afford a lawyer. His personal experience has made him a compassionate and dedicated lawyer, determined to make a difference in people's lives. Antonio and Catherine became actively involved in their local church, where Antonio shared his story of redemption and faith with the congregation. He became a mentor for young people who dreamed of being lawyers and an example of integrity and overcoming. The small Bible that Elijah had given him became a powerful symbol of his spiritual journey. Antonio kept her in his office, reminding her daily of the miracle he had witnessed and the importance of never abandoning one's origins and spiritual life. Samantha and David grew up in a spiritually filled home, following in their parents' footsteps of compassion and service to others. Antonio always returned to the park looking for the old man, but Elijah was never seen again.